It started with a beep, then another. A short, sharp chirp echoing through the quiet aisles of Summit Bay Mall's flagstone department store, the kind of suburban shopping center that smelled like perfume samples and floor wax. It was 6:42 p.m. on a Wednesday, too late for the after-work rush, too early for closing. The mall's overhead music hummed faintly, a saxophone instrumental looping over speakers that hadn't been replaced since the 90s. Renee Parker pushed her cart toward the register line, calm and unhurried. A navy blue blazer, jeans, neat braids pulled into a low bun, everything about her radiated composure. She glanced at her phone once, thumbed a text, and set it down beside the small pile of items. A bottle of lotion, a pair of sunglasses, and a neatly folded sweater still tagged. The cashier smiled absently and began scanning. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. Until the second scanner beeped. Longer this time, the sound that always made heads turn. 2 uniformed security guards by. The entrance stiffened. One, broad-shouldered, with a close-cropped haircut, Greg Whitman, spoke quietly into his radio. His partner, Evan Doyle, already started walking toward the register with the slow, deliberate stride of someone convinced he was about to be a hero. "Ma'am," Doyle called out before he'd even reached her. "Could you step aside for a moment?" Renee looked up, brows lifting just slightly. "Is something wrong?" Whitman joined in, the authority in his voice rehearsed. "We've had a report about possible merchandise being concealed. We just need to ask you a few questions." The cashier froze, eyes darting between them. Customers in the next lane shifted uncomfortably. Someone took out a phone. Renee's tone stayed level. "I haven't left the register yet, sir. You can see everything I'm buying right here." Whitman's hand hovered near his belt radio. "Then you won't mind letting us check your bag." Every word landed heavy in the stale mall air. Renee's heart didn't jump. It slowed the measured calm of someone trained for confrontation. "You're accusing me of shoplifting?" "Ma'am," Doyle replied. "We're just doing our job." That phrase, "doing our job," wasn't new to her. She'd heard it in alleys, interrogation rooms, and debriefings. It always meant someone was overstepping. Renee exhaled through her nose, almost a sigh. "Then do it correctly. Call your store manager, I'll wait." But Whitman had already gestured for another guard near the door. "We can do this right here, ma'am." The murmur started, soft voices, curious eyes. Shoppers slowed to watch. The unfolding scene. A black woman standing still beneath the fluorescent lights, flanked by 2 white men in mall-issue uniforms. Renee's phone buzzed against the counter. A message flashed on the screen, half visible before it dimmed again. "Status check? You clear?" She didn't move to answer it. Instead, she looked directly at Whitman. "If you touch my bag without probable cause, you're opening yourself to a lawsuit. Are you sure you want to do that?" The older guard hesitated just long enough for irritation to color his face. "Empty it, please." Renee didn't. She folded her arms. Not without management present. That refusal broke whatever patience he'd been pretending to have. "Fine," he said, signaling Doyle. "Let's do this in the office." The cashier whispered, I don't think she," but stopped when Whitman glared. Renee followed them, calm as stone. She knew resistance would only feed their narrative. Behind her, whispers rippled through the line, the quiet judgment that spreads, fast and sticks longer than truth. The security office sat behind a plain gray door near the shoe department. Fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting the cramped space in pale yellow. A table, 2 plastic chairs, a wall of monitors showing grainy camera feeds. Doyle shut the door, leaving a hollow echo. Whitman gestured. "Place your bag on the table." Renee did, slow and deliberate, then stepped back. He unzipped it, rifled through wallet, phone charger, receipts. Nothing else. "Check her pockets," he ordered. Doyle looked uneasy. "Greg, maybe we should do it." Renee's voice cut in, even but cold. "You're out of line." Whitman ignored her. "Ma'am, cooperate or we'll have to call the police." Renee looked him straight in the eye. "Call them." The silence that followed was thick. She didn't look scared. She looked certain, and that unnerved them more than protest ever could. Whitman's radio crackled. "Everything okay in there?" a female voice asked. He pressed the side button. "All under control." Renee spoke again, softly this time. "If you're planting something, I suggest you reconsider. These cameras don't belong to you. Mall security footage backs up everything that happens in this room." That made him glance toward the corner lens, a reflex he couldn't hide. She'd hit a nerve. He muttered, "Stay quiet," and turned away, pretending to study her receipt. Doyle shifted on his feet. "Greg, there's nothing here." Whitman's jaw flexed. "Check under the table." Maybe she dropped. That's when Renee's phone buzzed again. This time the message popped clear across the screen. "Signal received. Hold position. Back up en route." Whitman frowned. "You planning to ignore that?" Renee smiled faintly. "You'll want to answer your own phone in a minute." He blinked, confused, but before he could speak, the intercom outside crackled a panicked voice from the front desk. "Greg, you might want to come out here. There's, federal agents asking for you." Doyle froze. "Agents?" Renee folded her hands. "Told you." Whitman stared at her, words caught in his throat. "Who are you?" "Someone you should have left alone." Outside, footsteps thundered down the corridor, hard soles, purposeful. The door opened and a tall man in a dark suit stepped in, badge flashing under the harsh light. His tone was cool, clipped, official. "Greg Whitman, Evan Doyle. I'm Special Agent Curtis Reynolds, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to have a conversation." Whitman's mouth went dry. What is this about?" Agent Reynolds didn't answer. His gaze shifted to Renee, and for the first time she allowed the smallest nod, professional, precise, enough to tell him she was fine. He returned it, almost imperceptibly. Then to the guards. "Step outside. Now." They obeyed, confusion replacing bravado. The door shut behind them. Reynolds exhaled, lowered his voice. "You okay?" Renee nodded once. "They tried to detain me before I could pull the data stick. You have the signal?" "Already locked in. We're running it through Quantico servers. Turns out Flagstone's security contractor's been moving more than shoppers through this mall." Her lips pressed into a line. "Thought so." From outside the room, muffled voices rose. Whitman arguing, Doyle stammering. Mall security was unraveling. Reynolds glanced at his watch. "We'll handle them. You finish your cover protocol. Same extraction point. Parking level C," she said. 5 minutes. He slipped out, leaving her alone with the low hum of fluorescent light. Renee leaned on the edge of the table, eyes on her open bag, ordinary things masking extraordinary work. The last 2 hours had been a diversion gone sideways, but the mission itself was still alive. She whispered under her breath, not prayer, not curse, just a promise. They never learn. Outside, Whitman's voice cracked under questioning. Shoppers peered from a distance, phones recorded. Rumors already morphing into headlines. And somewhere deep in the mall's security feed, a hidden subfolder uploaded itself to an encrypted FBI server, video proof that what began as a shoplifting accusation was something far darker. The incident wasn't over. It was just beginning. The sound of voices outside the security office swelled like a tide, security personnel arguing, shoppers whispering, radios crackling with overlapping chatter. Renee Parker adjusted the strap of her bag, now zipped and resting, on the table. She didn't rush. Calm was her weapon. Every second she spent standing still made them sweat harder. Through the narrow window in the door, she could see Greg Whitman pacing in circles. His face had lost its swagger. A crimson hue flushed up his neck. Evan Doyle, the younger of the two guards, hovered near him, shoulders tight, eyes darting toward the FBI agent who was now talking quietly with mall management. Renee watched. Observed. Filed it all away. Years in the bureau had trained her to see what others missed, the twitch of guilt, the flicker of fear. And right now the guilt was written all over Whitman's face. She stepped out of the office when Agent Reynolds gave her the smallest nod. "Everything under control?" she asked, her tone soft, almost disarming. Whitman turned, bristling. This isn't over, he snapped, trying to sound authoritative. You can't just, Greg, the mall's general manager, Lauren McAdams, cut him off sharply. She was in her early 40s, her crisp suit already creased from stress. Enough. You just detained a paying customer without evidence. You're lucky she's not pressing charges. Renee said nothing. Her silence carried more weight than argument ever could. Lauren turned to her. Ms. Parker, I'm so sorry about this. We'll make sure, but Agent Reynolds interjected. It's fine. She's with me. The manager blinked, confusion flickering across her face. With you? Reynolds' voice didn't rise or fall. It simply cut through the noise. Federal Bureau of Investigation. We're conducting an ongoing inquiry involving this mall's contracted security firm. Ms. Parker is a cooperating asset. The entire hallway seemed to inhale at once. Whitman stammered. You're kidding. She said she was just... Renee looked him dead in the eye. Shopping. Doyle's mouth opened, then closed again. Wait. She's... Reynolds raised a hand. You don't need to know anything further. What you do need to know is that you've just compromised an active investigation. The color drained from Whitman's face. Investigation? What investigation? Reynolds ignored the question. He pulled out a folded document, crisp and official, and handed it to the manager. Federal authorization for data access. Will need all footage from the past 72 hours. Every floor, every entrance, every employee checkpoint. Lauren swallowed. You'll have it. Behind her, a few more mall security personnel had gathered, whispering nervously. The crowd of shoppers had been pushed back by now, but the damage was done. Rumors were spreading fast. Phones were out, recording. Someone was already posting on social media. Mall guards detain woman, turns out she's FBI. The headlines practically wrote themselves. Whitman rubbed the back of his neck, muttering something under his breath. He didn't understand what had gone wrong. This was supposed to be a routine stop, a petty accusation to show authority. Instead, it had turned into a federal storm. Reynolds stepped close enough that only Whitman could hear him. You're done talking. Sit in that office until we're finished here. Whitman didn't argue. Renee turned to the younger guard, Doyle. He looked pale, remorse creeping into his expression. Did you believe I stole something? She asked him directly. His throat worked before words came. No, ma'am, he said quietly. Not really. Greg said. Renee nodded once. Then remember this feeling next time someone tells you to follow orders blindly. He looked down, shame flickering across his face. She didn't linger on him. Guilt wasn't her goal, awareness was. Reynolds gestured toward the back corridor. Let's move to a private area. They walked together past the stockrooms and service doors, the noise of the main floor fading behind them. When they reached a small maintenance office, Reynolds closed the door and finally allowed his voice to relax. Good timing as usual, he said. Almost too good, Renee replied. They were seconds from planting something. Drugs? She nodded. A small foil packet. Classic setup, untraceable prints, plausible deniability. I caught the bulge in Whitman's vest pocket the second he told me to step aside. Reynolds shook his head. They're getting bolder. Or dumber. Maybe both. He unfolded a tablet from his coat and slid it across the table. We cross-referenced the names tied to Flagstone Securities contracts. 2 came up in our previous investigations, both connected to illegal surveillance sales. These guys are supplying camera access to private buyers. Renee's eyes darkened. So this wasn't just profiling. No, Reynolds said quietly. You walked into a nest. She leaned back, crossing her arms. How much do we expose tonight? Enough to make noise, he said, but not enough to blow the bigger case. Her jaw flexed. Understood. Meanwhile, on the other side of the wall, Evan Doyle sat alone in the hallway, elbows on his knees, staring at the tile floor. He could still hear snippets of conversation from inside the office, words like federal and evidence, and it made his stomach twist. He'd joined Summit Bay Security 8 months ago. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work. Greg Whitman had trained him, if you could call it that. The man's lessons were simple. Don't question authority. Keep your story straight and make sure someone always looks guilty. Makes them all safer, he'd said. But right now, Doyle didn't feel safe. He felt sick. He thought of Renee. No, Agent Parker, apparently, and the way she'd stayed calm through everything. The way she'd warned him politely, even while being accused. He'd seen real thieves before: the fidgeting, the panic, the guilt. She hadn't shown any of it. He realized he'd known she was innocent, and he'd gone along with it anyway. The door opened. Whitman stepped out, his face twisted in anger. "They think they can scare me," he muttered. "Feds always pull. This crap." Doyle stood slowly. "Greg, she's FBI. You detained an agent." Whitman's glare shot toward him. "You believe that? Please. It's a stunt. They're covering for her. You think an FBI agent shops for sweaters in a mall? Come on." Doyle didn't answer. "Listen to me," Whitman pressed. "We stick to the story. We got a tip. We followed protocol. No one can prove otherwise." Doyle stared at him. "What tip?" Whitman hesitated, the first real crack in his voice. "Anonymous call," he said quickly. "We get those all the time." But he wasn't convincing himself, let alone Doyle. "Greg," Doyle said quietly. There were no calls on the radio log. Whitman froze. The young guard's tone wasn't defiant, it was factual, certain. For the first time, Whitman realized the kid might not stay loyal. "You better watch your mouth," Whitman growled. "This is my department." "Not anymore," Doyle said. Across the mall, in the control room lined with flickering monitors, Agent Reynolds' tech contact Jared Collins plugged into the main surveillance hub. "Got eyes on the last 2 hours," he said. "Want to see something interesting?" Renee joined him, her eyes on the screens. "Show me." Jared rewound footage. The screen flickered, jumping back to the moment she entered the store. Then, 20 minutes later, a flash of movement near the register, a hand slipping something into the shelf behind her shopping cart. Renee frowned. "Freeze that." He zoomed in. The resolution wasn't perfect, but the outline was clear. A small foil packet tucked into place by a man in a navy jacket. "Whitman." Jared shook his head. He planted it before calling her out. Renee's expression didn't change, but her voice turned colder. "Send that file to the Bureau Archive, secure channel." "Already uploading," Jared said. "And you'll want to see this too. There's a pattern. Same tactics, same time of day, 3 prior incidents, all targeting black women. All arrests later dropped." Reynolds leaned over his shoulder. "So racial profiling's the cover for something else," Renee said. "Maybe it's leverage. The firm gets paid to make arrests. The more cases they log, the more their contract looks useful." Jared nodded. "And if a few lives get ruined, they don't care." Reynolds exhaled, sharply. "We'll make them care." By 8 p.m., the mall had thinned out, leaving only the echoes of cleaning crews and the distant rumble of closing gates. Renee stood outside the now quiet security office, watching Whitman through the glass as he argued with mall administrators. He was unraveling, voice raised, hands gesturing wildly. Reynolds joined her. "We're taking them in tonight, federal detainment, that's your call." She considered it. "Not yet." His brow lifted. "Not yet? If we arrest them now, they're higher up scatter. I want the next link." Reynolds folded his arms. "You think there's a connection?" "I know there is," Renee said. "Whitman doesn't have the brains to run his own scam. He's taking orders." From behind them, Doyle appeared hesitant. His voice was quiet but steady. "He's right. He doesn't run it. The orders come from a guy named Blake, corporate security rep. He meets Greg in the loading bay twice a week. Cash payments. Says it's performance bonuses." Reynolds looked at Renee. "Tom Blake, regional director." Doyle nodded. "He's here tonight." Upstairs in the office. Renee's eyes narrowed. Then that's where we go. 10 minutes later, they were outside the flagstone corporate suite on the mall's upper floor. The sign on the frosted glass door read, "Authorized personnel only." Inside, light spilled under the threshold. Reynolds motioned to Jared, who stayed behind, monitoring comms. Renee took point calm, confident, every movement deliberate. They entered, quietly. Blake was at his desk, talking on the phone. His expensive tie hung loose, his voice smooth with practiced charm. "I told you the numbers look great this quarter." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw them. Renee closed the door. "Mr. Blake, busy night?" He blinked, confused, then defensive. "Who are you? This is private property." Reynolds displayed his badge. "FBI, we're investigating your firm." Blake scoffed. "You've got to be kidding. Over what? Mall thefts?" Renee stepped closer. "Over framing innocent people to pad your company's performance data. Over targeting minorities to create arrest metrics that justify your contracts." His jaw clenched. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation," she said evenly. "It's evidence. You can see it yourself. Your head of security planted false materials in at least 3 separate incidents," Reynolds added. "And your financial records show unreported bonuses tied to those arrests. Care to explain that?" Blake's bravado faltered. "You can't prove," Renee interrupted. "We can. And we will." He looked at her more carefully now, recognition dawning. "You're the woman from the store, the one my staff detained." "That's right," Renee said. "You should have vetted your guards better." For a moment, he just stared at her, then reached for his phone. Reynolds' voice was calm, but edged like steel. "I wouldn't." Blake froze, fingers hovering over the screen. "Sit down," Reynolds ordered. The corporate director sank slowly into his chair. The confidence that had built his career, charm, control, manipulation, evaporated under federal authority. Renee leaned forward on the desk. "You can cooperate now, or we can drag this through court. Either way, you'll lose." He swallowed hard. "You don't understand what you're walking into. We're contracted through state law enforcement. You go after us, you go after them." Renee didn't blink. "Then we go after them." Outside, Doyle waited by the escalators, anxiety etched across his features. When Renee and Reynolds emerged, his voice was low. "Did he talk?" "Not yet," Renee said. "But he will." Doyle shifted awkwardly. "I don't know what happens to me now." Reynolds looked at him. "You tell the truth, that's what happens." The young guard nodded, though his hands trembled. "You think they'll fire me?" "Probably," Renee said honestly. "But better that than being part of a cover-up." He looked down. "Yeah, you're right." Renee studied him for a moment, a kid trying to do the right thing in a broken system. "Go home, Doyle, sleep, we'll call you tomorrow." As he walked away, Reynolds said quietly, "You sure about letting him go?" "Yes," she said. "He's not the enemy. He's proof by a whim." 10 p.m. The mall was empty. Police cruisers lined the lot, lights flashing red and blue. Whitman was escorted out in handcuffs, shouting protests no one believed. Shoppers had long gone home, but their phone footage had already gone viral. Renee watched from a distance, the cool night air brushing her face. Her phone buzzed again. A secure message from headquarters. "Excellent work. Proceed to debrief tomorrow. Operation still live." She typed back one line. "Understood. Continuing surveillance on Flagstone personnel." Reynolds joined her by the glass doors. "You handled that perfectly." She gave a faint, tired smile. "It's not done. Tomorrow the narrative shifts. They'll claim misunderstanding, overreaction, anything to bury the truth." He nodded. "Then we make sure it doesn't get buried." She looked out over the parking lot, the rows of lights stretching into the distance, the hum of engines, the faint murmur of onlookers watching the arrest. "They thought I was a target," she said softly. "They never realized I was the trap." 3 weeks earlier, Washington, D.C. The morning rain came down steady, soft enough to blur the skyline but loud enough to drown the noise of the city waking up. Inside a plain, windowless federal building on E Street, the elevator opened onto the 5th floor of the Bureau's Financial Crimes and Public Contract Oversight Unit. Renee Parker stepped off with a folder tucked under one arm and a cup of coffee in her other hand. Her stride was purposeful but calm, the kind of quiet precision that made people lower their voices when she passed. She wasn't a field rookie. She wasn't desk-bound either. She was one of those operatives who fit anywhere because she didn't draw attention until she wanted to. At her cubicle, she found a sealed envelope marked "Confidential Internal Only." Her name in clean typewritten font. No sender listed. She slit it open with a letter opener and scanned the first line. Flagstone security contract irregularities. Her brow furrowed slightly. Flagstone. She'd heard of them, a private security firm that handled everything from mall patrols to logistics warehouses. On paper, they were clean. But in practice, they'd escaped more audits than most small governments. She flipped through the attached report. 32 claims of wrongful detention in 2 years. 10 settled quietly. 0 internal disciplinary actions. Renee took a sip of coffee and exhaled through her nose. "Here we go again," she murmured. Moments later, a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "I thought you were done taking field assignments." Agent Curtis Reynolds leaned on the partition, his tie slightly crooked, his face lined from too many all-nighters. He was one of the few people Renee trusted, not because he was friendly, but because he was blunt. "Apparently the Bureau thinks otherwise," she said, tapping the file. "Flagstone Security." He whistled low. "Yeah. Heard the Office of Procurement's been getting heat about them. They've been padding arrest numbers for federal subsidy renewals." "That's the rumor," Renee said. "But there's more. They've been sharing surveillance footage with a third-party analytics group out of Texas. The data trail's muddy." Reynolds frowned. "You think they're selling camera feeds?" "I think they're doing something worse," she replied. "Profiling, building behavioral databases off mall footage and selling it under the table." Reynolds straightened. "You're volunteering for this?" Renee shrugged. "If I don't, someone less careful will." 3 days later, she was in Arlington, sitting in a borrowed sedan outside Summit Bay Mall, watching the slow rhythm of shoppers drifting through glass doors. The assignment had been approved faster than she expected, too fast, almost. But that was how these cases usually went. Politics above, quick pressure below. She tapped her phone, syncing her comm link. "Operation Ridgepoint online," she said, quietly. "Testing uplink." Reynolds' voice came through her earpiece. "Copy that. We've got remote eyes. Your cover's active freelance consultant, low profile. Keep interactions minimal." Renee smirked. "Always do." Her gaze followed the guards' rotating shifts near the entrance, all in the same navy blue uniforms. The same stiff gait of underpaid authority. Whitman stood out immediately. Older, heavier, carrying himself like a man who mistook control for respect. His subordinate Evan Doyle was younger, shoulders slouched slightly, not yet molded into cynicism. Renee noted both, then shifted her focus to the cameras lining the ceilings. Too many for a suburban mall. She counted 7 just over the entrance zone. A retail complex didn't need that level of coverage, not unless someone was using it for something else. By noon, she'd walked through every department: electronics, home goods, fashion, casually testing signal interference, noting where footage coverage dropped. She didn't shop. She didn't linger. She simply observed. Her bureau phone pinged once encrypted message from Reynolds. "Initial findings," she texted back. "Excessive surveillance density. Guards too coordinated. Suspect data relay hub on upper management server. Need access." A pause. Then his reply. "Understood. Proceed slow. No flags." Renee closed the message and looked around the crowd. Families, teens, couples, retirees, hundreds of people unaware that their movements were being logged, sorted, and possibly sold. It wasn't just a privacy issue. It was exploitation disguised as security. That night she checked into a short-term apartment under her alias. Sparse furniture, clean walls, no decor, exactly what she preferred. The fridge contained a single bottle of water. The freezer an unopened meal she'd never eat. She opened her laptop and typed a summary log. Day 1. Summit Bay Mall recon flagstone guards show pattern of target engagement based on appearance, not behavior. Confirmed 14 fixed cameras on first floor, 11 on second, plus unlisted storage feeds. Main control line linked to server farm registered in Dallas under subsidiary Apex Data Solutions. Preliminary link to government contract kickbacks likely. She saved the file, encrypted, and leaned back. Every new case carried its own rhythm, and she'd already felt the beat of this one. It wasn't loud. It was subtle, steady like a song that crept under your skin. Her phone buzzed again. Reynolds. "You're sure about Apex?" he asked. "Positive. Their code signature matches an old case from 2019, that shady analytics project in Houston. The one that used mall footage. For predictive policing?" "Exactly, and guess who ran field compliance back then?" Reynolds hesitated. "Tom Blake." Renee smiled grimly. "Bingo." A week later, the plan was simple. Confirm internal corruption by tracing one staged detainment. She'd provoke a minor incident enough to attract Whitman's attention and track how Flagstone handled the process. She wore plain clothes that day, blending perfectly with the crowd. She entered the store at 5:30 p.m., when shifts overlapped and oversight thinned. A small item placed incorrectly, a delay at the register minor, harmless triggers. She wasn't expecting what happened next. The setup came faster than she'd predicted. Whitman must have been waiting for something or someone to justify another performance report. She saw him whisper to Doyle. Then, the moment the scanner beeped wrong, he moved. And just like that, she was the suspect. Renee remembered the tone in his voice, smooth, rehearsed, meant to intimidate without raising suspicion. She'd heard that tone in interrogation rooms across the country. It was the sound of someone who'd gotten away with it before. Back in the present, sitting in a small conference room at the mall's management office, she replayed those seconds, in her mind while the bureau team gathered evidence. Reynolds leaned against the window ledge, arms crossed. "You knew they'd go for you." "I gave them an opening," she admitted. "I didn't think they'd take it that fast. Or that stupidly." She gave him a half smile. "Never underestimate arrogance with a badge." Jared entered, laptop under his arm. "Got everything synced to the field server. Dozens of deleted clips recovered from the security system, all tagged under training anomalies. Every one of them shows the same thing: staged detainments." Reynolds frowned. "They deleted the evidence and still kept copies?" Jared smirked. "People like Whitman always keep trophies." Renee flipped through the printed stills Jared handed her. Whitman and Doyle confronting different shoppers, each time stamped weeks apart. The pattern was undeniable. "Same M.O., she murmured. Approach, accuse, search, discover evidence, file report, drop charges quietly after 48 hours. They never meant convictions, they just needed numbers." Reynolds rubbed his temple. "This isn't a small case anymore. It's systemic fraud. And if Blake's in the loop..." "He's in the loop," she said, tapping one of the stills. "He approves every arrest report. His signature's digital." Reynolds let out a low whistle. "You planning to take him down yourself?" "If I have to." He gave her a look that mixed respect and exasperation. "You always do." Later that night, she drove back to her apartment. The sky was clear, now stars sharp against the black. She parked in the underground garage, cut the engine, and sat there a moment, letting silence settle. Her reflection in the rearview mirror stared back calm, alert, unflinching. She thought of her father, a postal worker who'd spent 30 years in uniform, always telling her, "Integrity doesn't make you popular, it makes you reliable." He'd been right. In her line of work, popularity got people killed. Reliability saved them. Upstairs, she poured herself a glass of water, opened her laptop again, and began typing a new entry. Operational log ridge point, Week 2 confirmed corporate link between Flagstone Security and Apex Data. Surveillance video tampering confirmed. Agent Reynolds to initiate warrant sequence via DOJ. Priority target, Thomas Blake, Regional Director. Secondary targets, Greg Whitman, Supervisor, possible field accomplices. Contingency protocol if field exposure occurs. Engage emergency beacon, Echo 7. She paused, fingers hovering over the keys. Then she added one more line. Personal note, exposure likely. The next morning, she walked into Summit Bay Mall again, same calm stride, same routine. But this time, she noticed something different. Whitman wasn't just patrolling. He was watching her. Closely. Their eyes met across the food court. His stare lingered a second too long. He knew. She turned away, pretending not to notice, and sent a quick coded text to Reynolds. Cover compromised. Proceeding to contingency. He replied within seconds. Hold ground. Backup monitoring. Do. Not engage first. She didn't plan to. But she also knew Whitman wasn't the type to wait. He'd make his move, and when he did, the Bureau would be ready. That evening, when she parked her car outside her apartment, she noticed a black SUV, 2 spots down tinted windows. Engine off, but lights faintly glowing on the dash. Not unusual. In D.C., but her instinct said otherwise. She walked calmly to her door, key in hand, and glanced over her shoulder once. The SUV didn't move. Inside, she checked her hallway camera feed, no motion alerts. She exhaled slowly, her pulse steady. She'd been shadowed before, but something about this felt internal. She called Reynolds on a secure line. I think I've got eyes on me. Describe. Late model Yukon. No plates. Parked near my unit. Could be Blake's people. He's got private investigators on contract. Could also be someone from inside the Bureau, she said quietly. Silence stretched. Then Reynolds' low reply. You think it's compromised? I think someone doesn't want this case closed. 2 days later came the confrontation, the false accusation in the store, the humiliation in front of strangers, the attempt to plant evidence. But what Whitman and Blake didn't understand was that they hadn't caught her off guard. They'd triggered her trap. Her beacon, hidden in her jacket hem, was linked to a remote transmitter at Quantico. Once activated, it didn't just send a distress signal, it dumped encrypted logs of every piece of data she'd collected. That's why she'd let them arrest her. That's why she'd stayed calm. It wasn't about surviving the setup. It was about catching the system that enabled it. Now in the sterile quiet of the FBI command van parked outside the mall, Renee sat beside Reynolds, watching the live data scroll across the monitor. Blake's corporate accounts are bleeding, Jared said from his terminal. We're tracing the cash flow. Looks like multiple shell companies. Reynolds nodded. Get the warrants ready. Renee didn't speak. Her gaze was locked on the screen, on a frozen frame of Whitman's face, just as he'd realized who she was. The shock. The fear. The moment he understood, the power dynamic had flipped. She'd seen that look before years ago, in a different case, different city, same arrogance. It always ended the same way. Reynolds broke the silence. You, okay? I'm fine, she said. Doesn't sound like it. She turned to him. Every time it happens, every wrongful stop, every public humiliation, they write it off as policy. This time, it's not policy. It's intent. He nodded slowly. And we're about to prove it. By midnight, the operation log was sealed, the data archived, and the orders in motion. Arrests would come soon, Blake, Whitman, maybe others. But for now, Renee allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. The Bureau van sat quiet, its engines idling low. Outside, the mall stood empty under the glow of sodium lights. The same store where she'd been accused hours earlier now looked harmless, just another piece of suburban architecture. But beneath its polished floors lay a network of secrets built on fear, greed, and prejudice. Renee knew this was only one case in 100 like it, but it was hers, and she intended to see it through. She looked at Reynolds. Tomorrow morning when the news breaks, they'll say it was an internal corruption probe. Keep my name out of it." He smiled faintly. "Wouldn't dream of it." She nodded once, turned her eyes back to the window, and whispered almost to herself, "Justice doesn't need headlines. It just needs proof." The rain began again, gentle, steady, washing over the empty parking lot as if the city itself wanted to start clean. The morning after the arrest, Summit Bay Mall looked deceptively calm. The glass doors gleamed, the floors were polished, and the music playing through the speakers was the same upbeat instrumental as always. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Every store manager had been told to avoid talking to press. Security patrols were doubled, and the guards who'd been so loud the day before now walked in silence, avoiding eye contact. In a small back office, Lauren McAdams, the mall's general manager, stood behind her desk, while Tom Blake, the corporate security director, leaned casually against the file cabinet, coffee in hand. His expensive watch gleamed every time he moved, a reminder that he was the only one in the room who wasn't nervous. "We're not letting this spiral," Blake said smoothly. "Local media doesn't have the full story. They think she's a consultant or something. We keep it that way." Lauren crossed her arms. "You do realize she's FBI, right? The Bureau knows you've been using falsified detainment logs. You can't just talk your way out of that." Blake smiled faintly. "Lauren, you don't get to where I am by panicking every time someone flashes a badge. We'll control the narrative. You'll release a statement saying our employees followed standard policy. We'll use words like miscommunication and procedural misunderstanding. It'll calm people down." Lauren shook her head. "You really think that'll work?" "It always does," Blake said. "The Bureau's not here to ruin businesses, they just want headlines. We give them something tidy, they'll move on." Lauren looked like she wanted to argue but didn't. She was tired of politics, of liability meetings, of men like Blake, thinking they could outtalk consequences. "You should know," she said finally. "Agent Reynolds came back this morning with a federal warrant. He's pulling all your financial logs." Blake's smile faltered for the first time. "He what?" "Every contract, every payroll file, they're combing through your records." Blake straightened, his jaw tightening. "Then we've got a problem." Across town, Renee Parker sat in a bureau conference room with Agent Curtis, Reynolds and Jared Collins reviewing evidence logs projected onto a wall-mounted screen. The air smelled of coffee and stress standard for mornings that followed field operations. Jared tapped his tablet. "Here's what we've confirmed. Flagstone has 2 sets of accounting books, one official, one off the record. The second one shows regular payments labeled as incentives. They line up exactly with dates of false arrests." Reynolds frowned. "Who authorized them?" Jared zoomed in. "Tom Blake." Renee didn't react. "He's been careful. Most of the transfers were funneled through Apex Data Solutions under contract maintenance fees." Reynolds nodded slowly. "Smart. Looks like legitimate subcontracting until you follow the wire path." Jared scrolled again. "There's more. 2 days before you were detained, a payment went out to a private consultancy called Harrow and Chase." Reynolds tilted his head. "Never heard of them." Renee spoke quietly. "I have." They both looked at her. "Harrow and Chase is a front company," she said. "It's been used before once in a 2018 case involving data laundering in Texas. The Bureau shut down their public operation, but someone rebuilt it under a new EIN. They specialize in scrubbing surveillance metadata." Reynolds leaned forward. Meaning Blake wasn't just making money off bogus arrests," she said. "He was selling mall camera data to private buyers, insurance firms, maybe even political clients. Whoever could pay." Reynolds' jaw clenched. "And now he's trying to bury it." Renee nodded. "Exactly, which means we've got less than 48 hours before he starts destroying digital evidence." Jared looked up from his screen. "He's already started. The file servers at Flagstone are being remotely wiped right now. I can see the deletion logs." "Can you stop it?" Reynolds asked. "I can slow it," Jared replied, fingers flying across the keyboard. But to freeze it, I'll need on-site access again. Renee stood. Then we're going back to the mall. Reynolds frowned. You just walked out of there 24 hours ago as their suspect. You want to stroll back in? She gave a faint smile. That's the beauty of being underestimated. At 11:45 a.m., Renee and Reynolds walked through the mall entrance, both in plain clothes carrying credentials tucked into their jackets. The same cashier from the day before caught Renee's eye and gave a small, sympathetic nod. The gossip had already spread. The woman accused of theft was an FBI agent. They passed a group of shoppers whispering. One of them, holding a phone, muttered, "That's her." Another replied, "You serious? The one they arrested?" The rumors had mutated into urban legend overnight, and Renee didn't care. Every whisper amplified the truth she wanted exposed. Inside the management wing, Blake stood near Lauren's office arguing with two IT contractors. His voice carried even through the closed door. "You're telling me you can't retrieve the backups? That's not acceptable." Renee entered, quietly. "You're deleting evidence, Mr. Blake." He froze. The contractors turned. Reynolds flashed his badge. "Federal order. Step aside." Blake's expression shifted between anger and panic. "You can't just walk in here." Reynolds cut him off. "We already did." Jared entered behind them, laptop in hand, connecting to the office network. "I've got it," he murmured. "Firewalls down, tracing route commands." Blake rounded. "On him." "You touch those systems, you're committing a crime," Renee replied evenly. "No, you committed the crime. We're just saving what's left." Lauren hovered uncertainly near the door. "What's going to happen now?" Reynolds said, "We're securing the network. After that, it's in the Justice Department's hands." Blake barked out a laugh that didn't sound confident. "You think this sticks? I've got half the city's police contracts under my company's name. You go after me, you go after them too. Nobody wants that fight." Renee looked at him for a long moment. "You're assuming you still have leverage." He met her gaze, jaw tight. "You think this is about racism or corruption? You're naive. This is business. Data is money. We just play the market." She didn't blink. "Then the market's about to crash." 30 minutes later, the office was filled with Bureau forensics agents boxing evidence, hard drives, documents, laptops, the sound of tape pulling from dispensers mixed with the soft hum of computers being cloned. It was methodical chaos. Blake sat slumped in a chair, his lawyer on speakerphone trying to sound confident, while his client's empire fell apart piece by piece. Renee stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the process. She'd learned long ago that justice wasn't loud. It was quiet. Paperwork, timestamps, data transfers, the little things that built an avalanche. Reynolds approached her with a folder. "Preliminary warrants executed. DOJ's moving fast." She nodded. "Good. Keep the pace up before he finds another loophole." Reynolds hesitated. "There's something else. Internal Affairs wants a full debrief on you. Someone leaked details about Ridgepoint." Her eyes flicked toward him. "Inside the Bureau? Looks that way." "Who?" He shook his head. "We don't know yet, but someone fed Blake enough information to anticipate your arrival." Renee exhaled slowly. "So the rot isn't just in the private sector." Reynolds gave a grim smile. "You surprised?" "Not anymore." That evening, after hours of processing, Renee drove back toward her apartment. The city lights shimmered through the rain, red, gold, and blue, reflected off the wet pavement. She turned on the radio for noise, but left the volume low. Her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't shake the question that had been gnawing at her since Reynolds mentioned the leak. Who inside the Bureau had tipped off Blake? Her phone buzzed. It was Nia Coleman, a local reporter she trusted from prior investigations. "I heard about your case," Nia said. "Word is, the mall's legal team's already spinning the story. They're saying the accusation was a misunderstanding, claiming you refused a security check and they followed policy." Renee gripped the wheel. "They're rewriting it. They're also hinting at a Bureau overreach," Nia added. "Blake's PR firm's pushing that you intimidated staff and caused a false flag confrontation." "Classic misdirection," Renee said. They can't kill the facts, so they'll distort them. You want me to publish the surveillance? Stills you gave me last month? Nia asked. Not yet. Let it simmer. When Blake's charges go public, we'll drop the receipts. Nia hesitated. You think he's going to get charged? Renee's tone turned hard. If he doesn't, I will make sure every reporter in D.C. knows exactly why. The next morning, the story hit the national news cycle. Mall security scandal. Private firm under FBI scrutiny. Cable anchors spoke over grainy footage of Whitman being let out in handcuffs. Commentators debated civil rights, police privatization, and racial profiling. Every outlet wanted interviews, but Renee stayed silent. Officially, she didn't exist in the narrative. Unofficially, she was the reason it existed at all. Inside the Bureau's headquarters, though, silence was colder. Her department director, Samuel Gray, summoned her to his office. He was a man who measured success in clean press conferences, not messy truths. Agent Parker, he began, voice even but cool. Do you have any idea how much political tension you've stirred up? Renee stood straight. With respect, sir, the case was legitimate. I'm not disputing that, Gray said. But we have partners in every State Department who rely on flagstone contracts. You've turned a local investigation into a federal embarrassment. With evidence of criminal fraud, she replied evenly. He sighed, rubbing his temple. You've done excellent work, but I need you to stand down until this cools off. She raised an eyebrow. Stand down? Let Reynolds finish the paperwork, he said. You're too visible now. She knew what that meant. They were sidelining her not for failure, but for success that made the wrong people uncomfortable. I'll follow orders, she said after a pause, but I'm not done. Gray gave a weary look. Just don't go rogue, Parker, we've got enough fires. She didn't answer. That night she went rogue. Not in the Hollywood sense, no gunfights or car chases, just quiet defiance. She logged into the secure bureau database from her home terminal and opened the encrypted case archive. A new document had appeared, one she hadn't filed. Its title, Ridgepoint Closure Summary. She clicked it open. The file claimed the investigation was inconclusive. No mention of Blake's data laundering, no reference to the deleted evidence, just bureaucratic filler. Someone inside the bureau was already covering for him. Renee stared at the screen, pulse steady but slow. Then she copied the hidden digital fingerprints, Blake's wiring data, the metadata from Jared's recovered files, the signed warrants, and placed them into an external drive. If they were going to bury the truth, she'd dig it back up herself. Meanwhile, Tom Blake wasn't giving up quietly. He'd lawyered up, hired a PR consultant, and was already pitching his own story to news outlets, that he was the victim of an FBI witch hunt. In a downtown D.C. restaurant, he met quietly with a man in a dark overcoat, someone who didn't give his name. Their conversation was brief, their voices low. Flagstone's going down, the man said flatly. But your contracts can survive if you play it smart. Blake leaned forward. And what do you get out of this? The man smiled faintly. Let's just say some people in your files might prefer their names stay buried. Blake hesitated. You're with the Bureau, aren't you? The man didn't answer. He just handed him a card with a single phone number and stood to leave. When Blake looked down again, the card was blank, no name, no title, just a number. At 2:00 a.m., Renee received an encrypted message on her burner phone. No sender ID, just 4 words. You're being watched again. She looked up from her desk and out the window. Across the street, a car sat idling under a flickering street lamp. The same make and color as the SUV from 2 weeks before. She turned off the light, walked to the kitchen, and picked up her phone. Reynolds, she said quietly when he answered. Yeah, they're back. He didn't sound surprised. You sure it's them? I'm sure. Stay put. I'll get a team. No, she said, staring into the dark. This time I'll handle it. 2 hours later, before dawn, she was parked 3 blocks away, engine off, watching as the same SUV pulled out from her street. Her instincts told her whoever was behind. This wasn't flagstone anymore, it was internal. She followed at a distance, careful, her headlights off when she could afford it. The SUV turned toward the industrial district, finally pulling into a fenced lot behind a logistics warehouse. She recognized the company name on the sign, Apex Data Solutions. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Of course. The warehouse sat at the end of a dead street, one of those industrial lanes where delivery trucks came and went, but no one ever looked twice. The Apex Data Solutions sign was half lit, the X flickering in the drizzle. To anyone else, it looked like a logistics hub. To Renee Parker, it screamed cover operation. She parked 2 blocks away, killed the engine, and waited. Through her windshield, she saw the same black SUV that had tailed her for days. Its headlights dimmed, engine idling. The driver never stepped out. That patience hours of motionless waiting wasn't a civilian's habit. It was surveillance tradecraft. Renee pulled on a black jacket, slid her bureau-issued tracker disc into her pocket, and stepped into the rain. Her shoes made no sound on the wet pavement. She approached from the blind side of the building where the exterior cameras were mounted too high and at the wrong angle, typical amateur placement by contractors who thought height meant safety. At a side door marked Employees Only, she swiped a universal override card. The lock clicked softly. Inside, the air smelled like dust and ozone from overheated servers. Rows of towers blinked blue and green in the dark. Fan noise hummed like an airplane cabin. Renee crouched, scanning for movement. Empty. She slipped on nitrile gloves and began moving through the aisles, eyes scanning rack labels server A3, node Delta, backup array B. The company's data structure was almost too neat, like someone expected an audit and wanted to look organized. That meant the real files were hidden, elsewhere. Halfway down the second row, she found a locked cabinet with no label. Its key slot had been removed, replaced by an RFID reader. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device the size of a credit card, a portable fob cloner. 2 seconds of static charge. 1 green blink and the lock disengaged. Inside, hard drives stacked like books, all unlabeled. She took out one, slid it into her decryption unit, and waited as code lines filled her portable screen. Directory, internal ops, bureau comms, feed files. Detected IA clearance logs, Ridgepoint, agent report, PDF Reynolds transfer, TXTR. Blood ran cold. Someone at Apex had direct access to internal bureau communications and not just general data, her operation files. The Ridgepoint case was supposed to be sealed behind 4 layers of clearance. She scrolled further and froze at a name in the metadata. Samuel Gray, her division director. The click of a gun safety broke the silence. Step away from that cabinet, Agent Parker. She turned slowly. The voice was unmistakable, steady, measured, the kind of voice that rarely had to shout to get obedience. Gray stood in the doorway, his bureau badge glinting faintly in the low light, a sidearm aimed squarely at her. "I was wondering when you'd connect the dots," he said. "You've always been too good for your own career." Renee kept her hands where he could see them. "You're selling bureau intel to Apex Data." He smiled thinly. "Not selling, sharing. The bureau needs private partners. Flagstone, Apex, Harrow, and Chase. They keep our analytics off the taxpayers' books. Everyone wins. Except the people they frame," she said. He sighed. "Collateral damage. You think the world runs on ideals, Renee? It runs on contracts and optics. You broke rank. You embarrassed 6 agencies in 1 news cycle. That makes you a liability. Then why follow me? Why not just shut me down internally?" Gray's eyes hardened. "Because you're the loose end that knows too much." For a moment, neither moved. The hum of servers filled the space, a mechanical heartbeat counting seconds. Renee's right hand twitched slightly. "You really want to explain to the Bureau why a senior agent shot a subordinate in a private facility tied to a corruption probe?" Gray tilted his head. "Who said I'd have to explain anything? You're off the books now, an agent gone. Rogue after planting false evidence to ruin a contractor. That's tomorrow's story." He tightened his grip on the gun. Renee didn't flinch. "You forgot something." "What's that?" The silent call. Gray frowned. What? She tapped her wristwatch twice. A barely audible chirp answered one that piggybacked on the building's Wi-Fi signal. Her emergency beacon, the Echo 7 protocol, had just gone live. Gray's expression shifted from smug to alarmed. You didn't. I did, she said. And they're already listening. 2 blocks away, Agent Curtis Reynolds sat in an unmarked sedan, watching the rain blur across his windshield. His phone vibrated once, displaying the coded alert. Echo 7 active. Damn it, he muttered, hitting the ignition. She's in. Jared Collins' voice came through the comms unit. Signal triangulating. It's coming from the Apex warehouse. She triggered the failsafe. Patch me in, Reynolds said. Audio only. Static, then voices Gray's first, sharp and angry. You can still walk away from this. Then Renee's calm, cutting through the interference. You first. Reynolds slammed the accelerator. We're 3 minutes out, get back up rolling. Back in the server room, Gray's composure fractured. You think they'll get here before I pull this trigger? Renee's voice stayed level. Maybe. But you won't pull it. Try me. Because the gun isn't loaded. He blinked. Check. Your chamber, she said. Gray hesitated, lowering the weapon slightly, instinct overriding arrogance. He ejected the magazine. Empty. Renee smiled faintly. You left it in your office. You always do when you come to meetings. His eyes widened. He'd underestimated her again. The next second she moved fast, smooth, precise. A pivot, a twist of his wrist, and the gun clattered to the floor. Gray lunged, but she caught his arm, drove her elbow into his ribs, and sent him sprawling against a rack of servers. The crash echoed down the corridor. Sparks flared where metal met metal. Gray wheezed, clutching his side. You think assaulting a superior saves you? No, Renee said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from her belt. Evidence will. She cuffed him to the rack, retrieved the weapon, and pressed her watch again. Echo 7 secure, suspect contained. Minutes later, Reynolds and his team burst through the side door, guns drawn. The first thing they saw was Renee standing beside the blinking servers, Gray slumped and shackled. Reynolds exhaled, half relieved, half furious. You couldn't wait for backup. She glanced at him. You would have done the same. Jared brushed past them to the computers. Holy hell, she found the feed. Direct uplink from Bureau internal comms. This is months of insider data. Reynolds stared at Gray. You sold us out. Gray coughed, voice hoarse. You don't get it. The Bureau survives because of people like me. I keep the machine oiled. You corrupted it, Reynolds said coldly. Gray laughed weakly. You'll thank me one day when Congress cuts your budget. Reynolds didn't reply. He turned to Renee. You okay? I'm fine, she said. Just tired of being polite. By dawn, the warehouse was swarming with federal units. Trucks, evidence teams. Flash photography organized chaos under halogen floodlights. Gray was led away in cuffs, head down, flanked by agents who avoided meeting his eyes. Renee stood outside under the awning, sipping black coffee from a paper cup. The sky was turning pale gray, the rain finally letting up. Reynolds joined her. His tie loosened, his expression somewhere between exhaustion and admiration. You realize what you just did? Filed a report, she said dryly. You exposed a mole inside the Bureau. That's above my pay grade. She gave a small shrug. It was overdue. He looked at her for a moment, then said, You know they'll try to make this disappear too. They can try, she said, but this time too many eyes are watching. Jared jogged over, waving a tablet. We've got confirmation. The servers contained full transaction records, every bribe, every data sale, every fake arrest flagstone logged. We even found communication threads between Gray and Blake. Reynolds nodded. That's enough to bury them. Renee stared out at the horizon. No, that's enough to clean house. Hours later, in a federal interrogation room back in D.C., Renee sat behind the two-way glass watching as Gray was questioned by internal affairs. He was pale, defiant, still trying to sound in control. "You'll never prove intent," he said through the speaker. "Everything I did was authorized off record." The investigator's voice was calm. "You falsified clearances and profited from confidential data. That's treason, Agent Gray." Gray smirked. "You'll call it efficiency when the dust settles." Renee turned away from the glass. She'd heard enough. Men like him always mistook self-interest for strategy. Reynolds met her in the hallway. "They'll keep him under until he flips on his corporate partners. You sure you don't want to sit in?" "I already know what he'll say." "Which is?" "That it was never personal," she said. "It always is." That evening, she drove to a quiet overlook just outside the city, the kind of spot where traffic noise faded into wind. She sat on the hood of her car, phone in hand, staring at the lights below. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Nia Coleman, headline draft: "FBI insider exposed in Flagstone data scandal." "You ready for this to go public?" Renee typed. Back, "Post it. All of it." Then she shut off the phone. For a long time she just listened to wind, to distant sirens, to her own heartbeat slowing. The job never really ended. It just changed masks. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, she felt something close to peace. 2 days later, the story detonated. Morning news anchors called it one of the most significant internal corruption scandals in recent bureau history. Gray's arrest led to resignations across multiple agencies. Tom Blake was indicted on 23 counts of fraud, and his PR firm went silent overnight. Flagstone Security dissolved within the week. And Renee Parker, her name wasn't in a way. Single headline. That was intentional. Reynolds found her at the bureau's rooftop terrace overlooking the Potomac. "You sure about staying anonymous?" he asked. She sipped her coffee. "Heroes make easy targets. I'm fine staying invisible." He smirked. "You're terrible at retirement speeches." "I'm not retiring," she said. "Just regrouping." He leaned on the railing. "You ever think about what comes next?" She looked out over the water. "The next case. There's always another." He chuckled softly. "You sound like you enjoy it." "I don't," she said, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. "But I'm good at it." They stood there for a while, letting silence do the talking. Down below, DC moved on, people heading to work, news vans packing up, life pretending it hadn't almost drowned in its own corruption. Later that night, Renee packed a small go-bag in her apartment. The rain had returned, tapping gently against the windows. She paused, glanced at a photograph on her dresser, her father in his postal uniform, smiling faintly at the camera. "Integrity doesn't make you popular," he'd said. "It makes you reliable." She whispered. "Still trying, Dad?" Her phone buzzed again, an encrypted message from an unknown sender. New assignment, South Carolina Field. Code name, Iron Veil. She exhaled, half a laugh, half a sigh. "Already?" Then, she zipped the bag, slung it over her shoulder, and walked out. The headlines came first, then the phone calls. When Evan Doyle woke up the morning after the arrests, his phone was already vibrating across his nightstand. Texts, emails, missed calls, all from unknown numbers. His first coherent thought was that the news had reached them. Flagstone Security. Federal investigation. Data fraud. Corruption. He turned on the TV, and there it was, his former boss's face plastered on every network. Flagstone executive Tom Blake under investigation for illegal data sales and falsified arrests. FBI confirms involvement of private contractor in racial profiling scheme. Evan sat on the edge of his bed, numb. His coffee went cold before he even took a sip. The room around him, bare walls, unpaid bills, the faint hum of the air conditioner, felt smaller than ever. He joined Flagstone believing it was steady work. He wasn't perfect, but he followed orders. He didn't lie, didn't cheat, yet now, because of the people above him, he was part of something criminal. By noon, his phone buzzed again, a blocked number. He almost didn't answer. "Doyle," a familiar voice said. "Greg Whitman." Evan froze. "You shouldn't be calling me." "Relax," Whitman said. "I'm out on bail, just need to talk." "I'm not supposed to. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." Evan rubbed his face. Greg, the Bureau. The Bureau doesn't care about you, kid, Whitman snapped. You think they're gonna protect you? They'll toss you aside soon as they're done using you. Evan didn't respond. I've got something you need to hear, Whitman said. Meet me at the old diner on Ashland Road, back booth. Then the line went dead. Evan stared at his phone for a long time before finally grabbing his jacket. The diner was half empty, the kind of place where the smell of coffee never left the walls. Whitman sat in a booth near the window, wearing civilian clothes but looking every bit the same rigid posture, clipped haircut, a man pretending to still have authority. Evan slid into the seat across from him. You've got 5 minutes. Whitman smiled without humor. You look like hell. Get to the point. Listen, Whitman said, leaning forward. They're trying to make me the fall guy. But I didn't run this thing. Blake did. You know it. Evan's voice stayed flat. You planted evidence. Whitman's eyes flashed. Don't start with that moral crap. You think you were clean? You stood there and let it happen. I didn't know. You didn't want to. No, Whitman shot back. We were all just trying to survive in a broken system. You think the FBI's any better? They're already rewriting the story to make themselves look good. Evan frowned. What story? Whitman slid a folded document across the table. Read. It was a printed news release from a government briefing. The FBI's investigation into Flagstone security confirms isolated misconduct by local management. Federal partners are cooperating fully. Evan read it twice. Isolated misconduct. That means you. Whitman nodded. Exactly, they're scrubbing everyone else. Blake, Apex, whoever else was feeding off this, they're going to walk. And the Bureau will pat itself on the back and move on. Evan's stomach turned. Why show me this? Because I need a witness, Whitman said. You saw what happened in that store. You know I didn't come up with this on my own. You planted evidence, Greg. I followed orders, he hissed. Blake told me to boost our detainment numbers. Said it was for corporate performance. You think I enjoyed it? You think I wanted to ruin some woman's life? Evan's jaw clenched. That woman was FBI. Whitman's eyes darkened. Yeah, and now she's going to bury us all. Evan pushed the paper back toward him. You buried yourself. He stood to leave, but Whitman's voice stopped him cold. You think she's one of the good ones? Ask yourself why a federal agent was shopping undercover in the first place. You ever wonder how deep this goes? Evan didn't answer. He just walked out. That night, Evan couldn't sleep. He replayed the entire incident in his mind, the accusation, the look on Renee's face, the humiliation he'd helped cause. He remembered the calm in her voice, the warning in her words. They're counting on people like you to look the other way. He hadn't looked away this time, but maybe it still wasn't enough. At 2:17 a.m., he opened his laptop and searched for Renee Parker. Nothing. No official record, no social media, no photo except a grainy thumbnail in an internal Flagstone memo labeled Consultant Report. He closed the browser and opened a new tab, typing instead, Apex Data Solutions. Most of the links were dead. The site had been taken down. But in a cached copy, he found one name buried in the footer metadata. Data Compliance Contact S, grayfederalmail.gov. The same name that had flashed across the news the day before. Samuel Gray, FBI Division Director. Arrested on charges of corruption. Evan leaned back, stunned. Whitman had been right about one thing. This went higher than he'd realized. The next morning, a knock sounded on his door. He opened it to find Agent Curtis Reynolds standing in the 8-8 hallway dressed in civilian clothes, ID clipped to his belt. Mr. Doyle, he said, voice calm but firm. We need to talk. Evan swallowed hard. Am I in trouble? Not yet, Reynolds said. Mind if I come in? He stepped aside. The apartment was small and cluttered, a couch, a coffee table, a half-packed box near the door. Reynolds scanned it with the quiet observation of someone who'd seen worse. You planning to move? Thinking about it, Reynolds nodded once. You met with Whitman last night. Evan froze. How did you cameras, diner security, Footage. You're not under investigation, but it's important you understand something. He sat down. Whitman's desperate. He'll drag anyone down with him if it buys him leverage. Evan sat opposite him. He says you're covering for Blake. Reynolds didn't even blink. Of course he does. That's what cornered men say. Is it true? No, Reynolds said. But you already knew that, didn't you? Evan hesitated. I don't know what's true anymore. Reynolds leaned forward. Then let me tell you what is. You're the only one from that department who didn't falsify reports. We checked. You never signed off on the planted evidence, never logged false statements. That's why I'm here. We want your help. My help? As a witness, Reynolds said. You saw the operation firsthand. Your testimony could tie Blake's orders directly to Whitman's actions. Evan looked down. You think they'll believe me? I worked for them. Reynolds' tone softened. You stopped working for them. That's what matters. Silence filled the room. Finally, Evan said, What about her? Agent Parker. Reynolds' expression changed slightly, a mix of caution and respect. She's handling the aftermath. I owe her an apology. Reynolds stood. You'll get your chance. 2 days later, Evan was escorted into a bureau office for an official statement. The same building where Renee had first reported to Reynolds weeks before. He sat across from a recorder, nerves taut. The questions came steady and clinical. Dates, procedures, details. He told them everything. The orders from Blake. The pressure to boost security numbers. The way Whitman bragged about catching easy targets. And finally, the moment they accused Renee. When it was over, he felt drained but lighter. The investigator closed the file. Thank you, Mr. Doyle, that'll be all. As he stood to leave, the door opened, and Renee Parker walked in. Evan froze. For a moment, words didn't come. She looked exactly as she had that night, calm, sharp, unreadable. Agent Parker, the investigator said, standing. This is Evan Doyle, the flagstone guard. I remember, she said. Her tone wasn't cold, but it wasn't forgiving either. The investigator nodded to them both. I'll give you two a minute. When they were alone, Evan spoke first. I'm sorry. Renee folded her arms. For what? For not stopping it. For not saying something sooner. She studied him. You could have lied today. You didn't. He nodded. Did it help? It will, she said. You gave us confirmation that Blake ordered those arrests. He hesitated. I didn't do it to help you. I did it because you were right about looking away. For the first time, her expression softened just slightly. That's something. They stood in silence for a moment. Then she asked, What are you going to do now? He gave a humorless laugh. Don't know. My name's all over the news. Nobody's hiring ex-security from a federal scandal. Then rebuild, she said simply. Start where people aren't looking for excuses. He nodded. You really think I can? I think you already started. When she turned to leave, he said quietly, You're not like the others. Renee paused at the doorway. Neither are you. A week later, Evan sat at a bus stop outside the courthouse, a manila envelope on his lap. Inside were the official clearance papers that closed his involvement in the Flagstone case. He was technically free, no charges, no restrictions. Just a future he hadn't figured out yet. A car pulled up beside the curb. Black sedan. The passenger window rolled down. Renee Parker behind the wheel. Need a ride? She asked. He blinked. To where? Anywhere but here. He laughed. You serious? Only partly, she said. Reynolds wanted me to drop this off. She handed him a folder. Federal Protection Division contact. If anyone tries to intimidate you, you call them. He took it. You think they will? They already tried with me, she said. They don't like witnesses. Evan looked at her. You're still in it, aren't you? Even after all this. She smiled faintly. You don't really quit the bureau. You just switch battles. He nodded slowly. You ever get tired of fighting? All the time, she said. But I'm better at it than pretending everything's fine. She looked toward the courthouse steps. They're going to call you a whistleblower soon. He shook his head. I don't want that title. Doesn't matter what you want. What matters is what you did. He sat quietly for a moment, then said, You know, Greg said something before they arrested him. He said the FBI would bury this. Make it look like one bad department. Renee's gaze hardened. They tried, but the files from Apex went public, thanks to you. Me? You sent those logs to that journalist, didn't you? She asked. Evan hesitated. You know about that? She smiled. I know everything that matters. He looked away, embarrassed. I didn't think anyone would believe me. They did, she said softly. And now, for the first time, the truth is bigger than the lie. That night, the city was quiet again. No press vans, no chaos, just life moving on. Renee stood on her apartment balcony, phone in hand, reading a final message from Reynolds. Case. Closed. Doyle protected. Gray facing federal charges. Blake flipped. She typed back one line. Good, on to the next. As she slipped the phone into her pocket, her thoughts drifted not to victory, not to headlines, but to the faces that had passed through this case. The cashier who'd been too afraid to speak, the mall manager who'd looked away, and Evan. Doyle, who finally hadn't justice she thought was never clean. But sometimes it showed up in the smallest acts of confession, a risk, a kid who chose the truth when no one expected him to. The night breeze carried the faint sound of sirens somewhere far off, not urgent, just distant. Renee closed her eyes, breathing in the silence between storms. For now, at least, it was enough. The Bureau's headquarters had been quieter since the arrests, but not calmer. The kind of quiet that hums beneath fluorescent lights like air charged before a storm. Inside the fifth-floor operations suite, Agent Renee Parker stared at a map dotted with red markers stretching from Washington, D.C. to Chicago to Atlanta. Each marker represented a partnered security contractor. Each one had received federal subgrays in the past 5 years. And each one, according to preliminary audits, had ties to Apex Data Solutions. Curtis Reynolds entered carrying 2 coffees. You've been here since 6, he said, setting one down. You ever sleep? Occasionally, she said, eyes still on the map. Every company on this list used the same internal data sharing software, same encryption key, same root certificate registered to a shell in Nevada. Reynolds frowned. Meaning someone inside the Bureau approved it. Exactly, he dropped into the chair beside her. Gray's been in holding a week. He's talking, but only about himself. Won't give names. He won't have to, she said. We'll find them in his footprint. He nodded toward the screen. Where do we start? Chicago, she said. There's a Flagstone affiliate there called Centriguard. They took over 2 malls and 3 government office contracts last year. Guess who signed off on their clearance renewal? Reynolds leaned closer, reading the file. Agent Thomas Keller, Internal Affairs. Bingo. 3 days later, they landed at O'Hare under Bureau aliases. Chicago in early spring still smelled like winter salt, diesel, and coffee. Their car ride downtown was silent except for Reynolds tapping on his phone. Local office thinks Keller's clean, he said finally, but they've been told to cooperate. Renee gazed out at the skyline. They always think that until the lights turn on. Their destination was Centriguard's regional HQ, a squat glass building wedged between warehouses near the river. Inside, employees moved briskly, all business casual and plastic smiles. The receptionist looked up as they entered. Can I help you? Reynolds flashed his ID. Federal Bureau of Investigation. We're here to review compliance protocols. The woman's expression flickered professional politeness covering sudden nerves. Of course, Mr. Keller's in a meeting, but that's fine, Renee said. We'll wait. They didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, Agent Thomas Keller himself emerged mid-40s, tall, confident in the way men get when they've never been caught. He extended a hand. Reynolds, Parker. Heard a lot about you two. Renee shook his hand, her grip firm. Funny. We've heard very little about you. He chuckled. That's how I prefer it. They followed him into a conference room lined with awards for public-private safety partnerships. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. So, Keller said, sitting at the head of the table, what brings DC down to my humble corner of the Midwest? Renee opened a folder and slid a photo across the table. It showed Gray and Blake together at an industry conference 3 years earlier. Behind them, barely visible, stood Keller. His smile didn't falter, but his pupils tightened. Nice picture. Small world, Reynolds said dryly. Big industry, Keller countered. Everyone knows everyone. Renee leaned forward. You authorized Centriguard's clearance renewal the same week Apex Data wired them $200,000. Care. To explain? Keller's tone stayed smooth. Corporate donations, trade conferences. I don't handle accounting, Reynolds said. But you do handle approvals. Based on recommendations, Keller said. And I have them in writing. Renee's voice sharpened just slightly. From Gray. That earned a flicker. Barely noticeable, but enough. He leaned back, crossing his arms. You're chasing ghosts, Agent Parker. Gray's already in custody. The Bureau's cleaned house. Renee smiled faintly. Then you won't mind if we check the closets. Outside, after the meeting, Reynolds exhaled. He's sweating. He's rehearsed, Renee said, but not innocent. The donation trail's real. Jared traced the transfer. Keller's signature authorized the data-sharing licenses. Think he's the new hub? Maybe. Or the, next link. She looked back at the building. Either way, we just knocked. That night, they met Jared Collins at a safe flat on the north side. The tech specialist had set up what looked like a miniature war room, 3 laptops, a portable server, and a dozen cables snaking across the carpet. I cracked Centriguard's intranet, he said, gesturing to the screen. You'll love this. They've been ghost uploading footage to a hidden endpoint. Reynolds frowned. Footage of what? Government offices, public lobbies, even an airport security checkpoint, all tagged Training Sample B. Renee's stomach dropped. They're still running the behavioral database, Jared nodded grimly. Under a new name, Project Liongate. Reynolds cursed under his breath. Who's buying the data? Can't tell yet, Jared said. The payments route through crypto exchanges, then through a non-profit based in Boston. But the admin account managing the uploads? He turned, the screen toward them. The name glowed in bold white text. Parker.rafbi.gov. Renee's eyes widened. That's my address. Someone's spoofing you, Reynolds said. Not just spoofing, Jared added. They're using your old encryption key, the one from Ridgepoint. Renee's voice went quiet. That key was destroyed. Apparently not, Jared said. Reynolds looked at her. So somebody's framing you now. The next morning, Internal Affairs summoned Renee back to DC for questioning. The flight felt longer than it should have. She sat by the window, expression unreadable, while Reynolds stayed silent beside her. Think Keller tipped them off? He asked finally. He didn't have to, she said. Whoever's behind this has access to our system. When they landed, 2 agents were waiting at the gate. Agent Parker, one said, tone stiff. We need you to come with us. Reynolds stepped forward. She's under my supervision. Not anymore, the agent replied. Director's orders. Renee gave Reynolds a look that said stay calm, then handed over her badge and weapon. I'll see you soon, she said quietly. The interrogation room was colder than usual. 2 internal affairs officers sat across from her. Agent Parker, one began. Your bureau credentials were used last week to access classified behavioral data from a restricted server. Can you explain that? Yes, she said calmly. They were stolen. By whom? If I knew, that you wouldn't need to ask. The officer flipped open a folder. The signature matches your encryption. The server logs show your device ID. Then your system's compromised. The man leaned back. We've heard that before. Renee's patience thinned. I exposed a corruption ring that cost this agency millions in bad contracts. If someone wanted me discredited, this is how they'd do it. The second officer asked quietly, Do you have proof? She met his eyes. Give me a day. Meanwhile, Reynolds wasn't waiting. He met Jared in the bureau garage, where the tech agent was packing up equipment. IA pulled her in, Reynolds said. They're railroading her. I know, Jared replied, but we can fix it. He held up a flash drive. I traced the spoofed key. The IP address resolves to a satellite office right here in DC. Same floor as Gray's old department. Reynolds stared. So the mole's still inside? Yep, Jared said. And get this, it logs remote access activity under a new admin. Keller T. Reynolds' voice hardened. Thomas Keller. Exactly. Reynolds pocketed the drive. We prove. This, we clear her. By midnight, Keller's office was empty. Reynolds picked the lock, slipped inside, and plugged the drive into Keller's desktop terminal. The system flared awake, prompting for credentials. Jared's voice came through the earpiece. I'm in. You've got 30 seconds before the Watchdog pings HQ. Data scrolled across the screen file trees, message caches, payment ledgers. Reynolds scanned until he found what he needed. Liongate Phase 2 schedule. Authorized by Keller and Gray, external partner. Apex data, residual. Got him, Reynolds muttered. Download running, Jared said. 15 seconds. But a sound behind him made him spin a click, sharp and unmistakable. Keller stood in the doorway, gun drawn. Should have known you'd snoop, Keller said. Reynolds, right? Gray always said you were too stubborn to die quiet. Reynolds lifted his hands slowly. You should put that down before you make this worse. It's already worse, Keller said. You people never learn. You kill one contract, another takes its place. Project Liongate, Reynolds said. What is it? Keller smiled. Insurance. You think Flagstone was big? This one's federal. Back in the interrogation room, Renee's phone buzzed on the table, an alert from the secure bureau network. A silent message appeared across the screen before she could hide it. Echo 9. Alert. Reynolds in danger. Location, DC field office. She stood. We're done here. The officer frowned. Agent Parker, sit down. Either charge me or move aside, she said. When he hesitated, she pulled a code card from her pocket, swiped the door override, and walked out before anyone could stop her. In Keller's office, the standoff stretched tight. Reynolds' palms itched. Keller's finger twitched near the trigger. Where's your partner? Keller asked. She's the one who broke Gray. I'd like to return the favor. You won't get the chance, Reynolds said. Keller tilted his head. Maybe not. That's when the lights went out. Total darkness, followed by the soft metallic snick of a door opening. Renee's voice came from the shadows. Step away from him, Keller. He spun toward the sound, too slow. A flash of movement, a disarm, and his weapon skidded across the floor. Renee drove him backward against his desk, pinning his wrist. Reynolds hit the light switch. Keller was face down, breathing hard, cuffed before he knew what hit him. Nice timing, Reynolds said. Renee gave a faint smile. You weren't supposed to start the party without me. He held up the flash drive. We've got proof. Keller's still running Apex's network. Then let's end it. The next morning, Internal Affairs cleared Renee of all wrongdoing. The evidence from Keller's system not only vindicated her, but exposed a broader scheme, Project Liongate, linking data laundering to several active federal programs. Director Gray's statement from custody confirmed it. Keller had replaced him after his arrest, keeping the same corrupt pipeline alive. The Bureau had cleaned one wound only to discover the infection still spreading. In the press, officials framed it as continuing oversight improvements. Inside the Bureau, whispers grew louder. Someone higher than Keller had to be funding it. That evening, Reynolds found Renee in the Bureau's courtyard, leaning against a stone column, phone in hand. "They cleared you," he said. "For now," she replied. "But Liongate didn't end with Keller." He nodded. "We'll find the rest." She looked up. "We thought you were due for a desk assignment." He smiled faintly. "Not anymore." She studied him for a moment. "You sure you want in on this next round?" "Wouldn't miss it." For the first time in weeks, she laughed low and genuine. "Then let's get to work." Above them, the Washington night hummed with distant sirens. The corruption they'd fought was deeper than either had imagined, but Renee Parker had stopped being afraid a long time ago. The bureau looked different after everything. The same gray hallways, the same sterile lighting. But for Renee Parker, it felt like walking through a mirror, every reflection slightly wrong, every smile just a little too rehearsed. She knew now that trust here was a luxury, not a virtue. And yet this was still her battlefield. She stood in the director's outer office, watching rain slide down the glass, as Curtis Reynolds handed a flash drive to the assistant. "For the director's eyes only," he said. The assistant nodded. "He's expecting you." Renee followed him inside. The office of Director Alan Shepard was a monument to controlled authority, walnut panels, American flag, muted portraits of past bureau heads staring down from the walls. Shepard himself stood by the window, tall, graying, polished in the way career men became after decades of political balancing. "Agents," he said, turning toward them. "You've had quite a month." Renee didn't bother with small talk. "We have Keller in custody." His confession ties back to Gray and Blake, but Liongate didn't stop with them. Shepard clasped his hands behind his back. "You think there's more?" "I know there is," she said. "Apex Data's contracts are still being renewed through federal shell accounts. Someone's keeping the pipeline open." Shepard regarded her carefully. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious problem," she said. Reynolds added, "We traced funding to a holding firm in Virginia called Northline Strategies. Their last audit was cleared by a name you'll recognize, Deputy Director Elliot Harrington." Shepard's face gave away nothing. "You're suggesting my deputy's complicit?" "I'm saying the paper trail leads there," Reynolds replied. The silence that followed was long, taut. Shepard finally said, "Leave it with me. I'll review everything personally." Renee's instinct tensed at the wording. Personally. That was how bureaucrats buried things, personally. "Sir," she said, carefully, "we'd prefer to keep handling this internally until we're certain who." He cut her off gently but firmly. "You've done exemplary work, Agent Parker. But this investigation's above your clearance now. Hand over your materials, that's an order." Reynolds opened his mouth to argue, but she touched his arm. A subtle warning. Not here. Not now. She handed Shepard the folder. "Understood, Director." He gave a tight smile. "Get some rest. You've earned it." In the hallway afterward, Reynolds muttered, "That was the sound of a cover-up starting." "I know," Renee said. "You think Shepard's dirty?" "I think he's protecting someone. And if I push, they'll sideline me again." He glanced around, lowering his voice. "Then we go around them." She gave him a small nod. "We always do." That night, in a nondescript apartment 2 blocks from the Potomac, the 2 agents met with Jared Collins. The tech analyst had turned the small living room into a digital command post again. Laptops humming, coffee cups everywhere. "Bad news," he said without preamble. "After Keller's arrest, someone wiped half the Liongate backups. The Virginia servers are gone," Reynolds cursed. "They're cleaning house." "Worse," Jared said. "They're replacing it with something called Orion Archive. Same data model, different name, but it's running under federal cybersecurity clearance." Now, Renee frowned. "Which means whoever's running it isn't outside the bureau anymore." Jared nodded. "Exactly. This isn't private corruption anymore. It's gone institutional." Reynolds rubbed his forehead. "You're saying the government's continuing the same illegal surveillance under a new label?" "Pretty much," Jared said. "But get this, the project lead's name on the Orion files? Harrington.E. Renee's expression hardened. Deputy Director Harrington. Yeah. And guess who approved his funding oversight? Jared tapped another screen. Director Shepard. The room fell silent. Reynolds finally said, "So the two highest-ranking officials in our chain of command are building the next version of Lion Gate." Renee nodded slowly. "And using us as cleanup for the last one." The next morning, Renee walked through headquarters as if it were any other day. Her badge still worked, her colleagues still nodded politely, but she could feel the difference. People knew. Rumors traveled faster than truth. She stopped by the coffee station, pouring herself a cup. Two analysts nearby fell silent mid-conversation. One of them muttered something that sounded like Ridgepoint, then looked away when she caught his eye. That was fine. Let them talk. It made her invisible. In the elevator, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered quietly. "Parker." Man's voice said. "You're making enemies in powerful places. Who is this?" "You don't need my name. Just know that Orion isn't what you think it is." "Then tell me what it is." "You're being watched," the voice said, "and not by who you think." The line went dead. She stared at the phone for a long moment, the hum of the elevator loud in the silence. Later that day, Reynolds found her in the parking garage. "I just got a call from an old friend at the Inspector General's office," he said. He confirmed something. Harrington's scheduled to meet with a defense contractor tomorrow night. Private location. No record. Renee glanced at him. "Where?" "Georgetown Harbor. Restaurant's closed for renovation, but the building's active. Looks like a front." She nodded. "We'll be there." "You think Shepard knows?" "He probably arranged it." Reynolds sighed. "We can't arrest them without cause." "Then we get cause." The next evening, the Georgetown waterfront was quiet except for the soft lap of water against the pier. The old restaurant sat dark except for one corner window glowing faintly. Renee and Reynolds parked 2 blocks away. Both wore casual clothes. Earpieces linked to Jared monitoring from the van. Thermal scan shows 3 inside. Jared whispered through the line. 2 at the table, 1 by the door. No outside guards. Renee adjusted her jacket. "Copy, we move when they start the transfer." Inside, Deputy Director Harrington sat across from a man in a dark suit with the angular confidence of a contractor. Type. A laptop sat between them. Lines of code flickered across the screen. 15 million in crypto, the man said. "Half now, half on delivery." Harrington nodded. "And the data pipeline? Already rerouted to the Orion servers. You'll get full analytics control by next week." Renee's voice came through the earpiece. "Got him." Reynolds raised the camera pen just slightly, recording, but the next words froze them both. Harrington said, "And what about the Parker file? Shepard wants it erased before oversight reviews start." "Done," the man said. "Her record will show termination by internal misconduct." Reynolds swore under his breath. "They're framing you, again." Renee's tone was calm, but cold. "Not this time." She stepped from the shadows and into the open. "Funny," she said, her voice echoing softly in the empty restaurant. "You always think you have more time before someone catches up." Harrington's head snapped up. "Parker?" Reynolds followed her in, badge out. "Deputy Director Elliot Harrington, you're under federal investigation for conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction." The contractor bolted for the back door, but Jared's voice came through. "Got him on camera. Agents outside intercepting." Harrington tried to stand, but Renee moved faster, sliding his laptop away and placing it in a secure bag. "You're finished," she said. He sneered. "You think you can expose me? Shepard signed every document. You'll never touch him without burning yourself too." "Then I'll burn if I have to," she said. An hour later, back at headquarters, Harrington was in custody. The laptop data was damning encrypted contracts, payment chains, internal memos bearing both his and Shepard's digital signatures. But when Reynolds and Renee presented the evidence to the Oversight Committee the next morning, something unexpected happened. The committee chair, an older woman named Senator Whitfield, listened carefully, then closed the folder. "These documents are troubling," she said. "But you understand what you're suggesting? That the sitting FBI director is complicit in illegal surveillance sales." Renee's voice was steady. "We're not suggesting it, we're proving it." Whitfield studied her. "If you're right, it'll tear this agency apart." "Then maybe it needs tearing," Renee said quietly. That night, as they left the hearing, Reynolds said, "You know she's not going to move fast." "She can't," Renee replied. "If Shepard goes down, half of DC follows." He sighed. "So what now?" Renee looked at him, then toward the skyline glittering over the Potomac. "Now we make sure the truth doesn't die quietly." Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from a secure number. "They know about Georgetown. Shepard's cleaning house. Leave DC tonight." She showed it to Reynolds. He shook his head. "You're not going anywhere." "I might not have a choice." He looked her in the eye. "Then we make one." 2 hours later, alarms blared through the Bureau's server wing. Jared's voice came through the comms. "They're purging. The Orion drives every file tied to the case." Renee and Reynolds sprinted down the corridor, badges flashing. Smoke filled the air from overheated servers. Someone had triggered an emergency wipe. She grabbed a fire extinguisher, cracked open the cabinet, and smashed through the glass door to the control room. Inside, a tech analyst was frantically typing, sweat dripping down his face. When he saw her, he froze. "Director's orders," he stammered. "He said to clear the system." "Step away," she ordered. He didn't. Reynolds moved in, grabbing the man's wrist, forcing his hand off the keyboard. The screen showed the last line of command code: delete, root, archives, Orion, force. "Too late," Jared's voice came. "They wiped half the evidence." Renee slammed her hand on the console. "Backups? None." Shepard was 2 steps ahead. Reynolds cursed. "So that's it?" She shook her head. "No. I saved one." He looked at her sharply. "You what?" She reached into her jacket and pulled out a drive. "When we took Harrington's laptop, I cloned it before turning it in. Everything's here." Reynolds exhaled. "You never stop planning ahead, do you?" She smiled faintly. "Not in this job." By dawn, the Bureau's building stood in uneasy calm. Dozens of employees whispered about the night's chaos. The official memo said it was a system malfunction. Renee and Reynolds sat in her car outside, both exhausted, both silent. Finally, he said, "You realize Shepard's going to come after you now?" She nodded. "Let him. I've got what he's afraid of." He looked at her, half admiration, half concern. "You sure you want to keep playing this game?" She turned the flash drive over in her hand, the metal catching the first rays of sun. "It's not a game, Curtis. It's war." The morning Washington woke to scandal. The Bureau tried to pretend everything was fine. Press vans idled outside headquarters, reporters shouting questions that no one answered. "Is it true Director Shepard ordered internal data purges? Has Agent Parker been suspended? Who's funding Project Orion?" Inside, silence reigned. Every elevator ride, every passing glance, every whispered conversation carried the same tension. People wondering who would still have a badge by nightfall. Renee Parker stood outside Conference Room A, holding the flash. Drive that could end careers, including her own. Her reflection in the glass door looked composed. The truth was less tidy. 3 days without proper sleep, a bruise on her wrist from the raid, and a heartbeat steady only because she forced it to be. Curtis Reynolds joined her. "You're sure you want to do this inside the building?" "Better here than a parking lot," she said. "If we drop it to the media first, they'll call it espionage. This way, it's testimony." He nodded. "And if they bury it? Then we burn them in public." Inside, the oversight board waited 8 officials behind polished oak. Shepard sat at the center, his posture flawless, his expression carved from calm stone. "Agent Parker," he said smoothly, "I understand you've obtained evidence regarding the Orion inquiry." Renee set the drive on the table. "You already know I have." It links you and Deputy Director Harrington to unapproved surveillance data transfers through Apex data. Flicker the first real crack in Shepard's poise. Those allegations are unfounded. Reynolds leaned forward. They're documented. One of the board members, Dr. Heller, cleared her throat. Director Shepard, would you like to address these claims? I'd like to remind the board, Shepard said evenly, that Agents Parker and Reynolds have operated without authorization for weeks. Their evidence was obtained illegally, making it inadmissible under internal protocol. Renee smiled faintly. Protocol's what you violated first. The air tightened. Every eye turned between them, predator and prey, and no one sure which was which. Jared Collins sat 3 floors below, plugged into the Bureau's intranet from a hidden workstation. Copying packet now, he whispered through the comms. Once they slot that drive, the backup uploads to every secure oversight node in the system. No way to erase it. Reynolds's quiet reply came through. Do it. Uploading in 3, 2. On the conference screen, a progress bar blinked to life. Blue light spilled across the room as hundreds of files populated a shared drive titled Orion Archive Full Disclosure Contracts, Emails, Bank Transfers, and finally, a message log between Shepard and Harrington. Shepard. Lion Gate ends Friday. Orion begins Monday. Clean the optics. Harrington. And Parker. Shepard. She'll be handled. Gasps rippled around the table. Shepard's calm shattered. This is an unauthorized system breach, security. Reynolds rose. Sit down, sir. 2 uniformed bureau guards appeared at the doorway, uncertain whom to obey. Dr. Heller turned to them. Stand by. No one leaves this room. Hours later, the Bureau's public relations machine spun into overdrive. An emergency statement hit. Every network. Director Alan Shepard has voluntarily stepped aside pending review. Deputy oversight will ensure operational continuity. But inside the building, nothing about it was voluntary. Shepard's badge had been deactivated. His office sealed. Agents whispered that he was negotiating immunity. Renee and Reynolds sat in the cafeteria, the quiet kind of exhaustion where even coffee tasted like ash. You realize they'll try to claim this was internal miscommunication, Reynolds said. They can try, she replied. Every file Jared pushed went to congressional servers, too. He blinked. You sent it to the Hill? She nodded. Insurance. He stared at her, then laughed softly. You really don't believe in half measures. She met his eyes. Not anymore. That evening, Shepard sat alone in an interrogation room. No cuffs not yet, but the cameras rolled, and the clock above the door ticked loud. An investigator asked, Did you authorize the continuation of Project Lion Gate under the name Orion? Shepard clasped his hands. Orion was a modernization effort. The Bureau can't operate blind while private entities exploit digital threats. Private entities you funded, the investigator said. He leaned forward, voice dropping. You think I'm the only one? Half the agencies in this city use the same channels. I just kept us competitive. Outside the glass, Renee watched in silence. She'd heard 100 justifications like that, all of them dressed as patriotism, none of them clean. Reynolds joined her. He's not breaking. He doesn't have to, she said. He's already broken everything else. By morning, the retaliation began, her bureau login locked out, her desk cleared. An email from Internal Affairs. Pending disciplinary review for breach of digital containment protocol. Reynolds burst into her apartment that night, phone in hand. They're building a case against you. Shepard's allies are leaking. That you planted the files. She didn't look surprised. Of course they are. You need to disappear for a while. Disappear, she said. If I vanish, they win. They rewrite history. Reynolds paced. Then what's your move? Renee picked up a small envelope from her counter and tossed it to him. Inside was a single memory card. Everything Jared didn't upload, she said. The personal correspondences, the whistleblower testimonies, names of every official who signed off on Orion's contracts. Reynolds stared. You kept the detonator, she nodded. And I'm about to pull the pin. At 7 a.m. the next day the world changed again. Every major news site, every social media feed, every independent journalist received an anonymous upload. The Orion Files, 3.2 gigabytes of classified corruption. Within minutes, screenshots flooded the internet. Shepard's emails, Harrington's transactions, internal memos linking Orion to federal grays disguised as AI research. The government scrambled to contain it. They couldn't. By noon, Congress announced emergency hearings. By evening, 3 senior officials had resigned. And by nightfall, someone leaked that the anonymous source was a female bureau agent. Renee watched the chaos unfold from a rented room outside Baltimore, coffee in hand, eyes tired but steady. The television blared pundits debating patriotism versus betrayal. She muted it. Her phone buzzed. Message from Reynolds. You did it. But you need to get out. They'll come for you. She typed back, let them. I'm done hiding. 2 nights later, a black SUV idled outside her motel. Renee saw it in the reflection of the window before she heard the door knock. Federal agents, a voice called. We need to talk. She smiled faintly. Of course you do. She packed her laptop into a small case, grabbed the flash drive, and slipped through the bathroom window. By the time the door splintered, she was gone, out the back, down the alley, into the rain. She moved like she had in training, efficient, invisible. Her car waited 3 blocks away, engine cold. She slid inside, turned the key, and disappeared onto the highway heading north. Back in D.C., Curtis Reynolds faced his own storm. Internal Affairs questioned him for 8 hours straight. When it ended, the lead investigator said, "You've got 2 choices. Distance yourself from Parker or lose your badge." Reynolds leaned forward. "If she's out, so am I." The man sighed. "Then I guess you're out." They took his badge and gun, but not his conviction. That night he met Jared in a diner off the interstate. "Shepard's in federal custody," Jared said. "Pleading cooperation, they'll trade him down to house arrest." Reynolds grimaced. "Figures." "Parker?" Reynolds shook his head. "Off the grid. But she'll surface. She always does." 3 weeks later at 9 p.m., a live news special interrupted every major channel. The anchor said, "We've received a recorded statement from the anonymous source behind the Orion Files." The screen cut to a dimly lit room. A familiar voice, calm, resolute, filled the air. "My name is Renee Parker. I was an FBI field agent assigned to investigate corporate misconduct within security contractors. What I found was a system built on surveillance and greed, one that targeted citizens under the excuse of safety. I did what the law could not. I exposed it. You may call it treason. I call it accountability." The message lasted 2 minutes. No face shown, just her voice. Enough to confirm the truth. Reynolds watched from a bar on the outskirts of town. When it ended, patrons sat silent. Then someone murmured, "She did the right thing." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, she did." Director Alan Shepard resigned publicly a week later. 2 days after that, he was found unresponsive in his Georgetown apartment. Official report, heart failure. Unofficial whispers, suicide, or silenced, no one knew. Renee heard about it on a crackling car radio somewhere in Maine. She didn't react. Some endings weren't victories, just closures. She parked near a fog-covered pier, stepped out, and looked toward the Atlantic. The horizon was gray, endless. For the first time in years, she didn't feel watched. Her phone buzzed one last time. Message from Reynolds. "They reinstated my clearance. They're rebuilding from scratch. You were right, it had to burn." She typed back, "Keep it clean this time." Then she powered the phone off, dropped it into the ocean, and turned away. The wind off the water was sharp, salt and freedom mixed together. Behind her, the Bureau would rewrite its history again, new faces, new acronyms, same promises. But somewhere, in the encrypted shadows of the internet, the Orion Files lived on. Immutable proof that truth could still break through concrete walls. Renee Parker disappeared into the mist. Not a hero, not a criminal, just a woman who'd finally stopped being silent. 3 years had passed since the Orion files scorched Washington. 3 years since Renee Parker vanished from every database, her name sealed beneath layers of redacted and classified. The world moved on, as it always did. New directors rose. New scandals replaced the old. But somewhere along the quiet coastal towns of Maine, a woman who once carried a federal badge built herself a smaller life, one with coffee instead of chaos, tides instead of deadlines, silence instead of sirens. She rented a weather-beaten cabin overlooking the Atlantic. Locals knew her as Miss Parker, the woman who fixes her own boat engine and never talks politics. And for the first time in her adult life, she was fine with anonymity. Until the knock came. It was early evening, sky-streaked, with winter orange. Renee opened the door to find a man in bureau gray standing on the porch. Younger, nervous, too clean for this kind of place. "Agent Reynolds?" she said instinctively, but the man shook his head. "No, ma'am. My name's Agent David Cole. I work out of the Washington field office." "Congratulations," she said flatly. "You drove a long way to the wrong address." He swallowed. "Director Whitfield asked me to deliver this personally." He held out a sealed envelope stamped with the federal crest. Renee stared at it for a long moment before taking it. "Tell her I said I'm retired." "She knows," Cole said. "But she also said you'd read it anyway." Inside, the letter was short 2 paragraphs typed in the clipped precision of government formality. To Renee Parker, recent intelligence suggests remnants of Project Orion have resurfaced under a private subsidiary named Northline Analytics. You are not obligated to assist. However, your prior experience with Apex data makes you uniquely positioned to verify the threat. Confidential meeting requested. Director Eleanor Whitfield. Renee folded it back into the envelope. The paper smelled faintly of recycled fear. She looked up at Cole. "How many people know where I am?" "Officially? None," he said. "Unofficially? Probably 2. She exhaled. "That's one too many." She met Curtis Reynolds 2 days later at a roadside diner outside Boston. He looked older silver at the temples, eyes carrying years of watching good intentions rot under bureaucracy. "You really disappeared," he said. "I meant to," she replied, sliding into the booth. "They're saying Northline's buying up old Orion code. They're calling it predictive policing again." Renee gave a dry laugh. "History's favorite loop." Reynolds leaned closer. "Whitfield wants you back in temporary service. Consultant role, quiet clearance, just to confirm whether it's real. And if it is, then she burns it," he said. "For good this time." Renee stirred her coffee, thinking, "You still trust them?" "I trust her," he said. "She's not Shepard." Renee looked out the window. Snow starting to fall, soft and silent. Finally, she said, "All right, one job, then I'm gone again." The company's headquarters sat in Northern Virginia, glass walls, minimalist architecture, the kind of building that screamed legitimacy while hiding rot behind clean lines. Renee entered as Renee Porter, compliance consultant. Her clearance was reinstated just long enough to pass security. Inside, everything gleamed: polished marble floors, biometric scanners, and friendly receptionists trained to say nothing meaningful. She met the CEO, Adam Connolly, in a conference room with a view of the Potomac. He was smooth, mid-40s, a voice like expensive bourbon. "Miss Porter, it's a pleasure. We're proud to be a federal partner again." "Again?" she said lightly. He smiled. "Our parent firm once worked on government contracts. Long history, different times." She opened her folder. "We're conducting standard audits of your data retention process." "Of course," he said, but his eyes flickered just once when she mentioned data. Later, in the server room, she found what she'd expected. The old architecture of Orion reborn. Same code skeleton, same encryption signature. Someone had resurrected the monster. She photographed the schema, uploaded it to a secure cloud, and walked out without looking back. That night, in her hotel room, she decrypted the metadata. The name at the top of the access logs froze her. Project Orion Archive Supervisor, T. Blake. Renee sat back, pulse hammering. Tom Blake. The same man whose arrest started everything, the Flagstone executive who'd vanished after testifying. She called Reynolds immediately. "He's alive," she said. Reynolds cursed. "I read his file. They said witness protection. Looks like he protected himself." "Send me what you have," he said. "I'll brief Whitfield." "Don't," she said sharply. "We don't know who else is in this. Renee." "Trust me," she said. "Not yet." 2 nights later, she traced Blake to a corporate retreat house in Maryland. She parked half a mile away, hiking the rest through tall grass slick with rain. Through the window, she saw him older, heavier, but unmistakably Blake laughing with 2 men over wine. On the table sat a tablet showing live analytics dashboards, labeled Behavioral Forecast Beta. Her stomach turned. It wasn't just Orion reborn, it was evolving. When she stepped onto the porch, the laughter stopped. Blake's bodyguards moved first, but she'd anticipated that. A flash of movement, a strike, a twist, and one gun clattered to the floor before the second man even aimed. Blake froze, eyes wide. "You miss me?" she said. He backed toward the wall. "You ruined me." "You ruined yourself," she said. "And now you're doing it again." He sneered. "You think you stopped anything? Orion never died. You just delayed it. You can't kill an idea that powerful." She pulled out her phone, showing him the screen, his system files uploading to federal servers in real time. "Watch me." The first bullet shattered the window before she heard the sound. Glass sprayed the air. She ducked instinctively, rolling behind a pillar. Blake screamed, "Don't shoot, you idiot!" Renee peeked through the shattered pane, a sniper on the tree line. Professional, silenced rifle, tactical stance. Not Blake's. Men. Too precise. Reynolds' voice crackled through her earpiece. "You okay?" "How?" "Whitfield sent backup. They're outside perimeter." "Tell them to stand down," she said. "There's another shooter. Not ours." The next shot hit closer, splinters exploding from the wall inches from her shoulder. She sprinted across the room, grabbed Blake by the collar, and shoved him toward the floor. "Move!" "Where?" "Out!" They burst through the side door. As headlights flared down the dirt road, black SUV, no markings. 2 figures stepped out. One raised a weapon. Renee fired first. Later, in an abandoned service tunnel beneath an overpass, Blake finally spoke between ragged breaths. "You don't understand," he gasped. "Orion wasn't mine anymore. After Shepard fell, the defense committee took it. They called it necessary oversight." "Military contracts," she said. He nodded. "They wanted predictive warfare threat assessment algorithms based on social behavior. I just helped them port the code." "Who's running it now?" He hesitated. "Someone you know." "Name." "Curtis Reynolds." She froze. "That's impossible." "He's the liaison," Blake said. "They said you'd never find out." Her throat tightened. "You're lying." "Am I?" he said, smiling through split lips. "Check your phone, Agent Parker. He's the one who reinstated your clearance." She waited until dawn before calling him. "Where are you?" Reynolds' voice sounded strained, defensive. "Maryland," she said. "With Blake." He was silent a beat too long. "You shouldn't have gone there alone. I found the new Orion," she said. "And your name's on the access log." He exhaled. "Renee, tell me it's not true." "I took the liaison position to contain it," he said. "To keep it from becoming another Flagstone. Whitfield approved it. You went back into the fire." "Someone had to," he said. "You ran. I stayed." Her voice softened but trembled. "You think you can control something built to spy on its own people?" "I think I can make it safer," he said quietly. She closed her eyes. "That's what Shepard said." Silence. "Come in," she said finally. "Before this eats you, too." She returned to D.C. under a rain that felt biblical. Her cabin was gone to her now that life severed the moment she dialed his number. In Whitfield's office, she placed 2 drives on the desk, one labeled Northline, the other Orion Resurgence. "This is everything," she said. "But there's one more name attached now." Whitfield read the metadata and sighed. "Reynolds," Renee nodded. "He tried to cage it, but it's already self-learning." Whitfield looked up. "Meaning?" "Meaning it's rewriting its own access protocols," Renee said. "By the time you unplug it, it'll already have duplicated itself elsewhere." Whitfield leaned back. "Then what do we do?" Renee looked her straight in the eye. "We shut down the servers, all of them, and we bury the system in open daylight. Public exposure, not secrecy." Whitfield hesitated. "You're asking me to break national security protocol. I'm asking you to protect the nation," Renee said. 3 weeks later, the Bureau and Congress jointly announced a mass decommissioning of experimental behavioral programs. They didn't call it Orion, but everyone who mattered knew. The purge triggered data failures across multiple federal branches. News commentators called it a digital reckoning. For once, they were right. When it was over, Whitfield resigned. Reynolds retired quietly, his reputation scarred but intact. And Renee? She disappeared again, but this time not as a fugitive. Months later, Reynolds received a small package with no return address. Inside, an old bureau coin, polished clean, and a note. "We were both wrong. You can't control the machine, but you can choose what kind of person you are standing in front of it." He smiled faintly and slipped the coin into his pocket. Somewhere on the coast, a woman fixed her boat's motor under a gray dawn sky. The radio crackled faintly with morning news. Talk of new transparency laws, of whistleblower protections bearing the Parker Amendment. She switched it off, content. The world still wasn't clean. It never would be. But this time, it was aware. She set her wrench down, wiped her hands, and looked toward the horizon, endless, uncertain, but finally hers.